Hi, everyone. My name is Jason. You know me as J187 from Slack chat. And I'm going to be putting together a quick tutorial video here for you on how to get started with a very basic NFL model. This is something I've done before, and if you've seen my last video, this will be very similar. I've just fixed my mic, and so the audio will be a lot better and easier to understand. And also in this one, I've changed my approach a little bit in light of all the changes that FC has been making with respect to how they display their player list. They've added all those new columns and options and stuff like that. And the more that they add and tweak, the more it can kind of screw up a traditional data model if you use the system that I showed you before on how to pull the data in by just referencing the cells. So we're going to do something a little different here, a little fancier and a little better. Also, I'm going to be pulling in the boom bust into the sorter as well, which is something that a lot of people told me that they really wanted to see done. So I have a blank Excel workbook here. Okay, that's what we're going to start with. First step is we're going to save this, to give it a name. I'm going to save it to this folder here I've called tutorial, and I'm just going to call it NFL main. We'll just call it main workbook, whatever you want to call it. Okay. So the first thing that we need is to think about some sort of a data source to bring in. So a data source can be anything that you're going to use as kind of the main component of where you're pulling projections, ownership, whatever you're using. In this case, we're going to be using the player list from FC. It's preloaded with Awesemo's ownership and fantasy point projections because I get my FC through Awesemo. And that to me is the best source on the market right now of information. Anything you want to use here, the steps will be the same pretty much. You just have to kind of adjust for whatever your sheet looks like. So on my main sheet here, I'm going to change the name of this, and we're going to call this NFL main. Okay, this is going to be my main dashboard where the magic happens. On the main dashboard page here, I'm going to try my best not to do anything where I have to delete or manipulate or anything that might mess up any of my formulas. I just want this to be a display page, basically. So to put my data source in, I'm going to create a new tab. Okay, so we're going to go new tab, and I'm going to call this copy player list. Now, for me, a convention that I like to follow, and I do recommend that you get into some conventions, however you decide they should be, I'm going to make this yellow because everything in my data model where I copy and paste things is yellow. And the reason I do that is because once you start building and adding onto this and these tabs start to grow and grow and grow, it's very easy to just have a quick visual. I need to paste this. Oh, there it is. It's that yellow right there. Okay. So now I go in here, and another little trick I like to use to make a visual is I know I'm going to be pasting right into this A1 as my absolute destination for where I'm going to start my paste. So I highlight this, and I go to this conditional formatting option, highlight cell rules, more rules. This will be selected, and then I choose no errors. Basically, this is going to format this cell as long as there are no errors in it. And there wouldn't be any errors unless you had like a formula that went awry or something like that. And since there are not going to be any formulas in here, basically I'm using this as a workaround to ensure that this formatting is always there no matter what, even if I delete, copy, and paste into here. So then the formatting I'm going to use is a fill, and it's going to be yellow. And I'm going to put a pattern in here. And I like these loose dots. This is just, again, my preference. I just like this right here as a very quick, easy visual to know that's where I'm absolutely trying to paste things into. So now let me grab the Fantasy Cruncher that we're going to be using and bring it into my sheet so you guys can see. This is basically just the 10-24 10-game slate pulled up in here. And I'm going to be choosing to copy this player list to my clipboard. One thing to note, whenever you copy your player list in FC, whatever you have selected as being displayed is what it's going to copy. So if I have quarterbacks, it's just going to copy the quarterbacks. So you want to make sure before you copy your player list that everything here is selected, okay? Another thing that I always do is I like to make sure that I have randomness turned on before I do it, because the way that FC player list copies, it will leave off entirely the randomness column if you don't have randomness on. And so that shifts things a little bit. The new way we're doing this, it's not going to matter, but it's just a habit that I'm into and I like. So we're going to copy this player list under the actions menu here. Make sure it's on my clipboard, which it is now. Go back here, and we're going to put right into this cell and hit Control V to copy it in. Now that my player list is in here, you'll notice it's a little different than it used to look, right? There's these headings up here. And Dave added these because with all the new stuff, there are multiple instances of TDs and points for like defensive and running back and wide receiver. And it was impossible to tell, are these touchdowns for the defense, touchdowns for the wide receiver? So he added these kind of extra headings up here. I love that he did this, and it's awesome, but I'm not really ready in my model for it. And he told me that he's gonna consider adding an option to turn those on and off. And so until I figure out if he's gonna do that or not, I haven't adjusted my modeling to account for the fact that these are all one row down. So the way I get around that is I just I select this player, which is the cell that I anticipated being here. And I just go Control Shift right down, Control C to copy, and I paste this whole thing up here. And I just move it up one, get rid of that top heading. Come down here, that's gonna leave you with 2 of your last entries here. So you just gotta delete that too to make sure that everything's shifted up, and we're good. So now we have the player list in here the way we would expect. This is our data source, and it's on our data tab. So now we can start pulling this data into our main dashboard page. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to start by taking these player names, okay? The player names are the only thing that we're going to reference in cell reference form from this. So back here, I'm going to go into A2. Actually, I'm going to go into A3 because we're going to add a couple of different headings above here. So A3, and I'm basically just going to say equals, and then in Excel, when you have an equal sign here and you're doing a formula, you can click around and it will add the reference to the sheet that you're going to. And then I'm going to start with the first player, and now it's basically just referencing A2 on this sheet, which is here. And it's going to bring Derrick Henry over, okay? So now up here, I'll type myself a heading, and we'll just say player name. And Derrick Henry is the first. Now, if we just did that, we would get a value for everything here. But when this list runs out, we'll start getting zeros pulled in because it's not finding a name. So what I like to do is I use this trick that says if this reference, if copy player list A2, if that cell, if it equals blank, double quotation marks next to each other is blank in Excel. If it's blank, and then, so this is, the logical test is, if this is blank, then what do we do? Value true. Then make it blank. In other words, if the reference cell is blank, then make this blank. If it's not blank, you get another comma, you get to this part. If it's false, then make it say the same thing as copy player list cell A2. And now we'll close parentheses and boom. Now, since this is not blank, it's going to execute the false part of this, which was make it reference this cell. And there it is. And so I'll copy this, and then I'm going to just copy it down. We'll go, here you just have to kind of decide how many players are going to be in your pool. I like to pick a nice big safe number because it really doesn't matter. So, I'll go to just 1,500. Why not? You're probably not going to have a player list that big, but why not? Okay, so, and what you'll see is, as you scroll down this list, you'll eventually get to the end. And when you do, it's blank underneath. Why? Because, again, our formula is saying, if copy player list A487 is blank, then make this blank. And lo and behold, it is, in fact, blank. See? So it just kind of mimics the blank spaces here, which is nice, keeps it nice and clean. And later on, that'll help you with formulas that, rank and do things like that, because you won't have values that you don't expect. So we're going to add player name. Now, I'm going to leave a few spaces here, all right? I am going to allow for some future development that we're going to do very soon in these spaces. So I'm going to start bringing in the rest of the player list in column F. So here is where I'm going to bring in the rest, okay? The next column that we're going to bring in is the injury column. And even though injury and likes are blank right now, I still bring them in just for future reference, keep it all whole. And that way, if stuff gets added here, we'll have it. And if it's useful, we'll know where to find it. So this is going to be, whoops, not INF. It's going to be INJ for injury. Okay, so now we're leaving these spaces intentionally blank. We're going to be adding something in there in a minute, okay? Now, this is where we're going to start the new formula that I hadn't used in the past that I think is going to be really helpful for us. Oh, you know what? Yeah, all right, we're good. So in the past, I had just basically done a cell reference just like this, equals copy player list B2. And that will keep the integrity of this to look exactly like this whole sheet was. But the problem with that is, let's say that you are using this model next week and we delete this player list and paste a new one in, and they've added 3 columns here in FC for new stuff, then where we expect position to be, it's going to be one of the new columns. And so under our model here where it's position, instead of saying running back wide receiver, it's going to say whatever the new stuff is. So this format relies on this always being the same. And we obviously can see that it's being changed on a somewhat regular basis. So we're not going to use that. We're going to use a formula that I'm going to show you. And I'm not going to explain this a lot because it's really complicated. And I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it. And this is probably one of the only times I'm not going to explain a formula to you. But I'm going to show you what it is. We're going to copy it and paste it in here. And here it is, okay? What this formula is, first of all, we have our trick. Oh, and I should tell you, I used if the player list reference was blank, then blank. But since we know that column A is always going to have a value as long as there are that many players in the player list, now we can start using column A as our reference for if it's blank, make it blank. Because again, we know column cell A487 is going to be blank because it's blank over here. So now we can just say if A3 is blank, then make this blank, okay? And then if A4 is blank, make it blank. So we don't have to go through that whole reference. We just do if A3 is blank, then make it blank. And if it's not blank, then if error is something that we're going to get into in a little while. I won't explain this right now. I will go into this, though. It's important. But basically what it says is if whatever formula follows this generates an error in here, then do this. And in this case, I say make it blank. So in other words, if whatever I'm doing here gets screwed up, don't put the error in here. Just make the cell blank. Because errors screw up calculations. Blank cells just get ignored. And then this indirect substitute address match formula. This basically, it says, the highlight of this that you want to look at is this BR2, which comes from where I copied it from. We're going to change this to F2 because it's got to reference this. It references this cell above it. And basically what this says is, take whatever is in this header, okay? And then go here, right? Because it tells you, copy player list, and substitute the address match of this on this copy list from 1 to 1, which basically says row 1 all the way to row 1. In other words, the entire row 1. So it's saying, take this, come here, look in row 1 all the way across, and find where this is. And then here, it's here. And then determine how many columns you had to go to get it. So it's in column 2, B. So then it comes back here, and it says, okay, it's in column 2. And then what it does is it references column 2, then -1 says take the row that it's in and go back a row, and then it will tell you the value that's here. Okay, in this case, it's blank, but if we were to say 5, it puts 5 here. Okay, so it basically says find this heading and take the value right under. Okay, so the cool thing about this is if we were to move this, like let's say FC changes it so that instead of this being here, it gets put here, this is still going to find it. See? It's going to know where it goes no matter what. No longer do you have to worry about there being, if FC moves it, you have to keep changing your model and everything else. Wherever they put it, it's going to be here. If they hide things and display things, and if you go into the Fantasy Cruncher options and hide and display, it's still going to have anything that's displayed on this sheet, it will find and put it here. So what we're going to start out by doing here, I just want to do this to show you, is we're going to say, these are the headings that we want. Okay? So we're going to copy these, go back here, and we're going to paste only by value, which is this option here, because we don't want to paste any formulas or anything else. So we're going to paste these here. And then the cool thing too about this formula is, as long as you do it exactly like it says here, okay, you'll notice that I do lock the number 2 here. I anchor this number 2 reference, but not the F, okay? And that's important because we only want to look in row 2, but when I copy this over, I want it to look in G. I want this to update to G, okay? So now we're going to take this and we're going to copy it to likes and then to position. And then you'll know position populates a value because there's blanks on the other sheet under injury and likes, but there are values for the rest of the stuff. So now we're going to take this, copy it all the way across to the end of our values. Boom. And boom. Now you start to see all of this stuff starts to populate in. One thing I like to do is I like to center everything. Okay. So just for visuals. Now you'll notice that as you copy this down, the other thing that will adjust is the fact that the row, see this part, it's reading row. This row is actually saying what row we're in. So right now, this row, the value, because these are open, would be 3. So we're in row 3. Now we're in row 4. And that'll just keep adjusting. So it'll keep looking in the right place. Because it's -1, it will look in, when we're in row 3, it's going to look in row 2, which is good because we have fewer rows here than we do here. Make sense? So now you just have to take this whole thing and pull it down to the 1500 that we decided on, so that there's a value in everything. And now you've got your whole player list and all the data you need copied into your main dashboard. And then as you update this, if you were to just say it's the next week and you want to come in here, you can click this top thing here to select everything, hit the delete button, grab your new player list, paste it in here, and all this data will update to the next week. Simple, simple. Now, one other thing we're going to do here is now we're going to start formatting, okay? We'll start formatting some things. So I'm going to make this, I like to make this like a dark gray, okay? You can do whatever you want, but I do recommend formatting it so you can understand it and see it, okay? Make it dark gray. Now, another trick I'm going to use, okay, is I'm going to grab a different version of this formula. And in this case, I'm going to put it above here, which is why we left the space. And in this different version, it's going to basically say match F2 again, but do it to row 1. And that's going to basically look in here. And instead of pulling this value, it's going to pull whatever's here in the header. And I put it there. And I do this just to make sure that visually when I'm working in my model, everything is where it's supposed to be. As long as everything is right, these two will match, okay? If ever you see a situation where this says team and this is position, you know that this data is wrong. And that's obvious when it's running back wide receiver, but when it's like ceiling or standard deviation, it's not clear. So you want that to match, okay? And then the other thing that I like to do is I like to make these, again, these are just visuals that I do, but I like to make these a much lighter gray And I like to make them yellow and font, and I'll maybe make it a little darker. Do it like that. Okay. So that way I can see, and then, I'll probably make all of this stuff bold. Again, these are just, aesthetics, visual things that you can do however you want to do it. And then, so actually, they call theirs player, which is why this, see this didn't populate a value here? It's because they call this player. See? So, I mean, to be honest with you, that's a good way of showing you that it will work as an error catching, situation to tell you, hey, there's a problem. So now I got it like this. So now let's come back here and start talking about why we left these spaces, okay? So we left these spaces intentionally. We have our player name, and then we have 1, 2, 3, and then this is going to be a blank space that just separates what we're doing here with the rest of the stuff. So why do we have player name and then 3 open columns next to it? Well, the answer is because if we come back to FC here, if we look in this upload data tab, the way this is formatted is it's player name, projection, exposure, and randomness. And you can copy and paste this right into here. So let's go ahead and we will label these projection. Okay. Exposure and randomness. Okay. And then we've got our blank space here just to kind of as a buffer. Now, let's go ahead and give this a color, okay? So, and I'm actually going to include my color here, I think, because I like to do that. So I'm going to give myself this color because this is the color that I like to use for this kind of stuff. Okay, so let's go ahead now and talk about what we're going to put in here. So for projection for right now, if you were going to manipulate your projections from what the standard Awesemo projections are here in AC, this would be the place to do it, because then when you copy and paste this whole section into FC, it updates to whatever your projections are. For now, let's just go ahead and bring in the projections from over there just to get something in here. But we're going to say if, again, we're going to do our trick. If A3 equals blank, then blank, okay? Because we don't want to be bringing in projections after 487 where there are no players. And then we're just going to say, if it's not blank, make it AC3, which is 2251, which is the projection for Derrick Henry right here. Where is it? FC projection, what happened? Oh, right here. This got messed up, huh? What messed this up? Interesting. What is all this stuff? So 2251 is a projection. Why did we go to salary? What's going on down here? Wow. Did FC mess this up? Where is my FC? Let me just quickly take a look and see what's going on here. Let me just copy the player list into a new tab for a minute. See. Yeah, that's kind of funny. I guess this is all like the rankings data and stuff from FC. Anyway, all right. I didn't even realize that, to be honest with you. So we don't need to care about that as much. But again, this is why he added those other headings to kind of signify that this is not the main projection. This is the ranking of the projections. But since it's going to find the first projection in this line, and he also did distinguish FC projection from projection, then that's fine. We just don't need all this stuff if we don't want to. We could just kind of come over here and erase all this. But either way, it doesn't really matter as long as you know you're using the right projection, AC. So we're going to bring this in. One trick I can show you now is since there's data next to us, adjacent to us, that we want to add this formula for everything, we can just go down here and click this bottom corner of this box, double click it, and it will copy down all the way down to, as long as there's data here, it'll copy data here and then stop. So that's a little quick shortcut we can use. So now we got projection. I'm going to center all this. We've got our projection. Now our exposure and our randomness. Now these two things are something that you very well might be manipulating before going back to FC with. Okay, so I'm going to give just a couple of quick formulas for these two. You can choose to do this however you want. This is an individual thing, okay? This is where you might want to find your edge. Maybe you have a better formula for exposure. Maybe you want to go through these all manually, okay? One thing to note, if you do put this in manually, if I was like, oh, Derrick Henry, I want 25%, and I hit percent, then understand that if you were to like get an update, you know, oh, we heard that there's a couple players out and FC updated, and then you copy the new player list in here. If Derrick Henry is not the first player in line anymore, then this 25% will apply to whoever is. If it's Christian McCaffrey, it'll be Christian McCaffrey. If it's Cup, it'll be Cup. So manual stuff is dangerous. There are ways to do it. It's more advanced than what we're going to get into here. But the ways you would do it would be to have a sheet where you make sure that all the players are listed in the same order, no matter what. In other words, you would pull them in like alphabetically or something, so that unless they added a player to the player pool or, you know, took one away completely, it would keep that integrity. I tend not to do a lot of manual stuff, especially in NFL. I do it in MLB when I can basically do it by team and the teams never change. So let's go ahead and do a formula here for exposure. And I'm just going to use something as an example. I'm not saying this is the right way to do it or the best way to do it, but let's just go ahead and take the field ownership, which is Z. Okay. So let's bring in the field here. If A3 equals blank, blank, if not, Z3. So boom. Right now, you would be setting your exposure to the same exposure as the field. You're identical to the field, 21%. I know one trick that a lot of people use is they do the field times something like 20%, add 20% to whatever they have. So this is the field times 120. And then since that doesn't really help you, if it's like 1% and you're adding 20%, plus 3% is something else people do. So the field times 120 plus 3%. And this, so now, and then you hit percent. And now this gives you 28% of Derrick Henry when the field is at, what do we say, Z? 21%, okay? And then if Derrick Henry was like 1% owned, then instead of giving you like 1.2%, it would give you 4.2%, which is at least a reasonable amount if you thought Henry was a good play. Now, you can come back to this and say, I want to add a qualifier. If his projection is higher than, you know, or let's say you only wanted to go over the field on guys that had good value, right? So let's say that you want to make sure you always find the right value listing here, because sometimes it's actual value and sometimes it's, I want to make sure that I don't pull. All right. I want to make sure that I pull the projected value, not actual value. All right, that must be this. Okay, so let's say it's value, which is an AI. So you may want to do something like this. You may want to say, if AI3 is greater than 3 or 2.75, then go over the field. If not, right, now value of false, then let's just stay with the field. So basically this says, if the projection is greater than, if the value is greater than 2.75, then do this calculation to go over the field. But then if the value is false, if it's not greater, then just stay with the field. So in this case, we see that Derrick Henry has a value of 2.85. So we're going to do the projection. If we said, make sure it's 2.95, now it's just going to go back to the field because he doesn't meet that qualification. You may also want to say, if it's less than 2.5, then stay at the field. If it's less than 2.95, then stay at the field. You could even say, you can nest another if statement in here and say, okay, in the condition where it is not greater than 2.95, right? So if it is greater than 2.95, do this. If it's not, then you could do another if AI3, which is the value, if the value is less than 2, then do the field times half, do half of the field. And then you can add another one that says if, or you could then say just if neither of those two things is true, then stay at the field. Okay. One trick you'll see, whenever you're putting closing quotation, closing parentheses at the end of your formulas, you'll notice that they color code. So the purple one closes the purple one, the red one closes the red one, the black one closes the black. The first parenthesis you put is always going to be black. So when you hit the black one here, that's when you know your formula is totally closed. So in this case, let's just say we came back here and Derrick Henry was, so in this case, Derrick Henry is 21% because he is not above 295, but he's also not below 2. So let's say he was above 295. Now he goes to 28%. Let's say he was below 2. Now he goes half the field. So you could do something like that too, okay? Now, note that I just typed over my formulas, which is something I told you never to do, and I just did it to kind of show you. I just want to make sure that I add my formula back in there so we get his real value. Okay, cool. So you can do something like that, right? You can do that and then copy it down and boom. Now, again, just remember, you can do whatever you want for exposure. You could say, if he's a quarterback, 25%. If he's a defense special teams, 15%. In fact, you probably don't want to do stuff for defense and special teams that are the same. You may want to come back here and say, at the very beginning, if H, which is position 3, equals DST, then just make this 15%. And if not, we get to close our quotations. Then make it 15%. And if not, then do all this fancy stuff. So this basically just says anybody that's a defense and special teams, just make them 15% because I want to spread my defense around. And if it's not defense, any other position, do this whole calculation. But notice how we went red here because we added a new nested statement. We get to close with the black. Boom. So now, when you copy this down, any defense or special team should go to 15%. And it does. So no matter what the field is at, no matter what, it'll go to 50%. So again, this is preference, totally what you want to do. Randomness, I will make a suggestion here. Okay, so there's a formula called the coefficient of variation. And basically what that is it says to take the standard deviation for a player, which is listed here, P. Standard deviation, I'm not going to get into it here. Google it if you want. But basically, it tells you how far away from the mean, typical performances could be. So when this player has a performance that is different than their mean, it's typically, you could look at it as it's either 12 points from the mean, either positive or negative. So it's either 6.2 points higher than what they average, or it's 6.2 lower. Okay. So anytime Henry takes the field, if he's projected at, say, 30, he might be getting 6.2 points more or 6.2 point less typically. Obviously, he could have outlier performances, but these kind of center on the most common, deviation from that. So coefficient of variation, and again, we're going to do if A3 equals blank, then blank. Okay. Coefficient of variation basically tells you to take the standard deviation, P3, and just straight up divide it by the mean. And if you don't know, by and large, projections are means or can be considered means. They're basically kind of the average points that we would expect. So projection being in, where did we just see projection? What am I doing? Projection in AC. Okay, so AC3. So P3 divided by AC3 is basically standard deviation divided by the mean, and that gives you 55, which if you call it a percent, it's 55%. This basically tells you what randomness would be appropriate for the standard deviation of 12.4 for Derrick Henry. You can do that for all players. The other thing you can do is we can manipulate this, okay? So we can say, and I'll put some parentheses on the standard deviation so that we can manipulate that, because I would never manipulate the mean. The mean is the mean. But you could say, let's do this times 2. In other words, this is taking 2 standard deviations away from the mean and incorporating that into the range of outcomes that we want our randomness for. Now that's going to go to 110%, okay? So is it like, if it's 100% and it's saying that Henry's projected at 22, could Derrick Henry get 45 points? Of course he could, well within his, range of outcomes. So that's a reasonable randomness. Something like 400% for, a player projected for something like 10 points is probably not that reasonable if, their ceiling is 20 points. But this is reasonable. But that doesn't mean that it's the right thing to use when you're actually making lineups. Because again, we don't want possible. We don't want, within the range of outcomes. We want somewhat frequent likelihood, type situations here. But we also want to walk that fine line because we want to incorporate some of the outlier performances. I would not go to 2 standard deviations in the NFL. I would definitely do that in a very variant sport like MLB. Okay, I would definitely go to that kind of randomness. In fact, if this was MLB, I might even go higher than that. I would stay to 1 or lower in the NFL. I have been using 0.5, 0.75. As you can see, that gives you 28% randomness. So 0.5 standard deviations, okay? So we're staying a little safer, but I think that that's not a bad thing to do. So now you can see we've generated some errors here. And the most obvious thing is divide by 0. Well, his projection was 0. We divided by 0. Can't do that. So now we've got to add some conditions here so that we don't run into these errors. One thing we could do is we could just simply say, this is where I'll show you that if error, and we'll encapsulate this whole formula in an if error, right? If error, so if error, do this, blank. And the if error works a little bit differently than the if. If error basically says if error parentheses, and then it says the value. In other words, do this out. If error, if this causes an error, then do this. See, value of error. So if this calculation makes an error, then do this, blanket. So we could do that. And then that'll take away any of these errors and just leave these people blank, which is appropriate. But the other way you can do this is you can add some nested if statements. So we'll add an if statement, though, because what you'll see is, whoa, 132, right? Samaje Perine. Because he's projected for so few points in this particular slate, but his standard deviation is pretty normal, right? It's, oh, while we're on it, one other cool thing you can do here is if you want to lock in the players' names and the headings so that while you're scrolling around, you can always see, think of everything above you that you want to lock in. So in this case, I don't want to lock in the first. I want to lock in the first 2 rows because I want to be able to read all this stuff. And I want to lock in the first column. So go to the right of the first column and below where you want to lock into, which is here. And then go to View, Freeze Panes, and Freeze Panes. That will freeze everything above and to the left of this. So now we can go over here to standard deviation. And as we scroll down, see the headings stay. And we can, go back and wherever Samaje Perine was with his crazy 132% randomness. Or we'll do any crazy randomness that we see. Let's see. Who's got crazy randomness for us? Oh, I'm looking at the wrong column. Hello. I'm looking at exposure. All right, so we can literally hit Wayne Gallman, 484% randomness. All right, that's because his projection is 0.62, but his standard deviation is still 6. So that's going to produce a ridiculously high number. The problem here is that this mean is no longer a mean. It's a projection that is used as like a placeholder, or it's something that's game scripted for the fact that even though when he does produce fantasy points, he has a standard deviation, we don't expect him to get much play here. So in these cases, you want to kind of put in some sort of a cap, right? So inside of our if error, right before our original formula, we're going to say if. Now we want to do projection, okay? Because the projection is the one that's going to screw us up. Because the standard deviation is already calculated, but the projection is the thing that's going to change. It's the variable. So if AC is, now we could say if it's greater than, pick a normal number for, boom, 5, right? Then do this calculation out, okay? And if not, make it blank, okay? So in other words, if it's not 5 or greater, we don't want any randomness, okay? So we could do that. The other thing that we could do, right, and I have an error here because I haven't closed it yet, but I don't want to close it because the other thing that we can do, right, is we can just simply say in here, if, by the way, I recommend always doing your if errors last. I just think that for people that are new to Excel, that really can help you visualize, because it kind of wraps around the whole thing. It can help you when you're nesting to not get screwed up. So we can just go back to our original formula and say if, and then the result of this, if the result of this calculation is greater than, pick a number you want to cap your randomness at, 45%. So if it's greater than 45%, then just make it 45. And I've got a little something wrong here. Let me see what's going on here. Oh, because there we go. So if the result of this calculation is greater than 45%, then just make it 45. Cap it at 45 if it's going to be more. If not, then do the calculation. Okay. So now you'll see, and I just want you to know our errors are going to come back here for a minute. Okay, there are errors, but now you shouldn't have anybody that's above 45% randomness. See, you've got a few people with low projections that are at 45, but no one goes above it. Okay. And then once you've got that, you just come back, and again, around everything, if error, then you come back in here, blank, and then add your parenthesis to close it all out to make it black, and you're good. Okay. So now we get our randomness set up so that it's showing us blanks where there are errors, doesn't go over 45, and we're good to go. So now we've got all this done. You can just take this whole thing, okay, for all of your player list, Control-C copy. Let's bring in Fantasy Cruncher. Here we are. And we'll go to upload data. Put it right in here. Oh, one thing I probably should have mentioned, just make sure you don't capture the header, because there's already a header here. So you don't want this to be like player name. Just get Derrick Henry to get the name. And then upload projection. Once it goes green, it means all of the stuff that we just calculated is now what your Fantasy Cruncher will have in here. Okay. So, and obviously the projections are all the same because we left them, but you'll see there's individual randomness for everybody, and there are exposure caps for everybody. Okay. Then just make sure if you're going to crunch that if you want to use new projections, just choose my projections instead of FC or Awesemo projections, so that you use whatever's in here if you manipulate them. Okay. So done with our data sheet, but note, you can add things in here if you want. Okay. You can take this and scoot it over, right? You can insert a bunch of columns in here and add whatever you want in. I'll just quickly show you. So my NFL model, I've got it set out the same way, but I've got a ton more stuff. I have a boom bust tool that I calculate myself. This is my version of the boom bust tool. I've got my top plays for the day. I've got the biggest boomers section. I've got a little settings section here for my different boom values and all that. I've got my value plays for the day, team info. Then I've got this section here. And as you can see, this is a good example. All this stuff is the stuff that Fantasy Cruncher added in. And because it's not on my player list right now, it's hidden. It's here, but it just doesn't populate. So, and then all the stuff after populates. That's why that new formula is like the way to go. And then after this, I've got all these like matrix, matrices that I use, this matrix and that matrix. And I use these things for like my sorter so that I can, pull certain values for like, I'll show you, like I use it when I make my cards here so that I can go through here and have each team and their players. And all this stuff comes from all those matrices and stuff. So you can add whatever you want to add in here. Okay, this is just the basics. And just don't forget to keep saving it as you go, right? Because you don't want to lose anything. Now, the next thing we're going to do here is we are going to do a sorter. I'm going to check and see if I think it's wise to do that now, or if I should do this in a separate video, because I don't want to run too long on this. I'm not really sure. All right, we'll start it here. So we're going to do a new tab. Okay, and our new tab we're going to call sorter. Okay, and actually, you know what? I think I'm actually gonna stop the video here, and then I'm gonna do the sorter in a video because I think I'm gonna run too long here. Let me do that. I'll stop, and I will do the sorter part of this in a part 2. All right.